Yeah, I got some interesting poll results here, Patrick. It looks like most people on the call are currently using Workspace, so that's great to see. Not many people are actually very familiar with AppScript, which makes sense, because if you're already an expert, probably don't need us.
Probably don't need this one.
Yeah. And then as far as coding languages, we do not have a bunch of expert coders on here today.
Excellent.
Which is fantastic about AppScript, because you don't have to be all the time. And I know if you need some help, we're always there for that.
Absolutely. It's thank you for everybody that has participated in that. And for those that are not familiar with the concepts that we're going over today, this should be a good starting point, and we'll reference some other material that you can take away from today that will sort of help you on your journey if you do want to become sort of an AppScript power user. Great. Those polls are still open if you'd like to, if you haven't voted yet and you'd like to drop a vote. I think we'll get started here in another minute or so.
Sounds great, Patrick. I'm going to go on mute and turn this over to you, John, and Daphne.
Thank you much, David. Daphne, I think we are at 2:03, so I will hand off to you. We can get started.
Perfect. Sounds good. Awesome. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Automating Tasks with AppScript and Google Workspace. In this session, we're going to take a deep dive into the features and common use cases, as well as be able to ask any questions you have about AppScript. So this deep dive will show you the features in action and go over how to automate tasks with AppScript so you can apply it to your team. This meeting is being recorded, and all registrants will receive a link at the end to view it later this week. We do ask that you stay on mute because there's a good amount of people in this call today. So yeah.
Excellent.
Awesome. And then my name is Daphne Shears. I'm a sales development rep here at Worsta. With me today is John Bakalarczyk, and manager of workplace solutions, and Patrick Della Peruta, practice lead of digital workplace. Thanks for joining us today, guys.
Thanks, Daphne. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Daphne. Glad to be here on another session. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited to get started. But before we do, just a reminder for everyone, this is a live broadcast, so we do ask that we keep questions in the chat or save it for the Q&A session at the end, except for those interactive moments like polls. We'll answer them at the end of the presentation. Additionally, you can connect with us on LinkedIn. Our colleagues will paste our profile links in the Meet chat for you to check out. Perfect. In case you didn't know already, this event is being hosted by Worsta. Our mission is to help organizations maximize their use of the cloud to compete in a modern world. We work side by side to help people make good technology decisions and grow their businesses in ways they wouldn't have the ability to do otherwise. This helps organizations develop cultures of continuous innovation powered by real-time collaboration. And before we get started, we asked you to complete a poll as you were coming in about your knowledge of AppScript. And it looks like the majority of us are not familiar with AppScript. So John, let's talk it out, shall we?
Absolutely. So what is AppScript? Google AppScript is a Java-based development platform that makes it fast and easy to create business applications that integrate and automate tasks across Google products. There are two key features of Google AppScript. One is Google has pre-baked in most of the Google Workspace API libraries into AppScript, making it easier to access workspace services like Gmail, Calendar, and Drive. The second is that it's entirely web-based. There's no need to install any sort of third-party tools like VS Code or NPM packages to get started. That's not to say that you can't use those tools if you're familiar with them and you're an advanced developer, but the goal here is just to get users up and running in the web and be on any computer at any place and be able to start scripting just by going to script.google.com. Or if you're within the Google editor or like Sheets or Docs, you would click on extensions and AppScript and it would take you right into the editor. There are three methods to deploy and use AppScript. There's the standalone script that has no user interface and just works completely in the background. Second, there's a container-bound script, which is tied to a Google Doc form or sheet that does functionalities based on what user inputs on those sheets or documents. Third and last is a application that uses HTML as the front end of the application, allowing user interaction. With all that, what can AppScript do? It can add custom menus, dialogues, and sidebars to Google Docs, Sheets, and Forms. You may have already seen this if you're familiar with Google Workspace services. It can automate processes through triggered actions, such as hourly triggers or daily triggers, or even an on-form mission. You can also write custom functions and macros for Google Sheets, similar to Excel and what would be Visual Basic in the Microsoft world. Again, as I mentioned, the web apps, you can publish single page or very small web applications that can then do a task and provide data. You can build add-ons to extend Google Workspaces. We've all seen now that bar on the right-hand side of our screen with the calendar and tasks, and we can add additional workspace add-ons there. Your company can write your own based on the needs of your user base. Also, to help streamline Hangouts chat workflows, building chatbots, or what now they call chat apps, within chat that keeps you in and being able to execute workflows or tasks right from within the chat interface.
And on that one, John, that's one sort of I've been working on for us internally here, right? I have the my agenda bot that I'm working on, right? So I want to be able to invoke a bot through our Google Chat that has the ability to add items to our agendas for our weekly meetings. One of the examples, or one of the things I'm working on internally. Those are, I think, all great examples. I think, however, best explained with some live demos. What do you think? We'll switch over to that.
Yeah, jump right into it.
All right, and I'll take over here for a second. So I'm going to switch over to this slide, and what I'm going to do here, we'll switch back and forth through a couple of different tabs, so hopefully it's not too distracting. But I did want to go over a couple of the apps or examples that John called out there. One more of the utility based, right? So this is a container bound Google Apps script that really derived from a need from a couple of technologists that were receiving and being inundated with a whole bunch of like system alerts and system notifications via email, right? So they had this large label with a whole bunch of email, and they were trying to delete it, and it turned into what we've actually published here. So I'm going to switch over to a Google Sheet. As John mentioned, Google Apps Scripts give you a couple of abilities in how to deploy and access your Google Apps Script. One of those being container bound. So from Google Sheets or Google Forms or Google Docs, via your extensions menu, you should have a link to Google Apps Script. So we'll just click over to that just to go through and show you what this looks like. Here's the IDE for Google Apps Script. This is all web-based. This is the new version of the IDE as well. You can see here at the top right corner, there is an option to revert back to the classic editor. Most of the functions now have made their way over to the new IDE, so you can use the new IDE for most functions, although I think there's still like some script property stuff that you may have to go back to for the old one. Any event, in the main section of the screen, you can see all the code that we have written for this particular function. If you're familiar with JavaScript, the language will look very familiar as it does work. It's based on JavaScript. It works very similar to JavaScript. A lot of functions do carry over. A couple of things to call out. We are using a Google Sheet to declare some parameters. I'm going to go back to that and show you what that looks like in a second. But skimming through the code here, you can see it's it can be a little bit intimidating, but relatively straightforward. So for example, if we wanted to like declare a specific drive folder or drive ID, we would do something like declaring that drive ID or doc ID. Scrolling down further in the code, you can see some other things, like some of the things are automatically highlighted or colored certain ways. This is the power of Google's IDE, in that it is responsive and will help you sort of accomplish what you're looking to accomplish. So for example, Gmail app refers to a service that is part of Google Apps Script that allows you to leverage the Gmail service to do things like send email and read labels and things like that. What I really love about the IDE, and John mentioned that you can use some other editors if you want with Google Apps Script. I prefer the cloud-based IDE for things like this. If I know that there is a function called Gmail, or I know that AppScript can support Gmail, but I'm not quite sure the function name, I can use type ahead to find that. So you can see here, I just started typing the word Gmail, and it brought up the function that I may actually want to use in this example. And now if I hit the period, it will bring up now the list of methods that I could use to call that function, right? So if I wanted to get draft messages, for example, I may just use the type ahead to start building my string or my code to do whatever it is that I want to do. So that's a little bit about the editor. You can see some other things here in the layout of the editor. Of course, your run functions as you're building code. If you want to test its run, you can run it from there and select the different functions that you create. You can debug, put in all sorts of logging as you're writing code, and do that all directly from your editor. A couple of things here on the navigation panel here on the left-hand side. John mentioned triggers. So if you create a function, you can have that function run as often as every 5 minutes or every 1 minute maybe now. And you can do that by adding a trigger. You're going to select the function in your app script that you want to run. And then what that event is that's going to cause that trigger to go off. So we mentioned time driven, so we'll select that from our dropdown. And you can see here now we have the option to really drill down into how often on a time interval do we want this to run. So do we want it to run every 5 minutes, every hour, every day, etc. That's a little bit about the triggers and how that works. On the executions pane, I can see when this script was run. So I can go back if I'm going to report maybe of an issue or something like that. I can go back into this executions pane and look for some relevant information that may lead to or help sort of explain why maybe a particular function didn't run. And finally, on the overview button, similar to the executions, you can come here, see the number of executions, how many users are using my function or my utility, and then see some other data about user errors, things like that. So that's a very high level of app script and its interface. I do want to bounce back over to our sheet, though, just to explain this a little bit, right? So I mentioned we have a utility that will automatically go into Gmail and delete messages that are in a certain label. So to visualize that, I have here in this mailbox, I have this workspace updates label, right? So I get an email from Google every day that summarizes all the updates that they put out in their blog. Then I try to read this every day, and it just sort of goes out into its label, and I'll forget to delete them every so often, right? So this is very important for maybe for organizations that are on business standard SKUs or the business SKUs that have limited or finite storage. Keeping those mailboxes clean is a good way to keep you under your storage capacity. So in any event, going back to the script here, I've laid out my format. I have told my script that I want it to look for any email that's in that workspace updates label, right? So I declared that in column A. And I've told it that I only want to keep email for 1 day for anything that's in that label. So as part of this script, you can see here we've extended Google Sheets just slightly, and we've added this new menu called Delete Old Email. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and I'm going to click on Run Now. The script is now running in the background, and as soon as it's finished, it's going to update the last start and last completion time, which is going to be today, so it's not going to see any change there. But you can see that it's taken 5 seconds to elapse, so it will sort of count how long it takes to execute that trigger for you. So we run that script, and if I come back into my email now, we can see that the messages in that mailbox have completely disappeared, except for the one message that was sent within that 24-hour period. And that is because within my code, I said to keep mail for 1 day. So very small example, but how, a very, a little bit, investing a little bit of time to develop a utility like this can really save either yourself or a team or your entire company, a lot of man hours and sort of tracking email, things like that. So that's one example. Any questions on that? I didn't see anything, JB, that I missed in sort of going over that.
No, you didn't. I think the only other point is great is for those companies that might not be working on G Suite with unlimited storage. This is a great to help manage, those 15 gig or 30 gig, quotas for end users, and almost make it, you're not even thinking about it, it's doing it for them. So
That's right. I love this. I use container bound sheets for a lot of things. So a lot of what I do is actually based off Google Sheets and container bound scripts. But as John mentioned as well, you can do other things with app scripts. You can build an entire front end UI and have a web page that looks and feels like a web app, all based on Google Apps Script. I have a smaller, lightweight example here that I put together for this, and this is just a web page. This is published through the Apps Script editor, right? So after you build your script or your app, you have the ability to publish that, and you'll be generated a unique URL, at which point it can be accessible by your users. In this example, our project management office, our PMO office, when we start a new project and we have a new client, something like that, we want to make sure that all of the assets that we create are in a specific format within our repositories within Google Drive. So instead of somebody going into our shared drive and creating a new folder for a customer and then all of the subfolders that we need as part of that project, what we've done is devise a way to do that automatically via a couple of inputs. So via this web page, we have just 2 inputs here, and this could be built out to really support any number of inputs that you would like. But we have just 2 for our needs. So we're going to do client name, and we'll use automate in August as the client name, and we'll use today's date maybe as the project name. And today is what, the 25th of August, 2022. So I'm going to go ahead and click on submit. Again, this is all custom, right? So we are spitting back this little creating folders message. This is just sitting in the background. It's churning in the background, and it's now finished, right? So now we're spitting out via that app script a link to the Google Drive location where we've created these folders. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And we can see here within our shared drive, it has created a new folder, a new client folder called Automate in August. It has appended the project name, which is today's date, to the end of that. So it sort of keeps it nice and clean. And then within that folder are all the subfolders that we have created automatically. They're all related to that project. Nobody has to go and create these. Within these folders, we have templates that will be related to that project. So for example, if we have a common project runbook or a common project status document or something like that, we can preload those templates in these documents or in these folders so that whomever is part of that project team doesn't have to go and recreate. It's all there for them. Again, another sort of a simple example in terms of how it functions on the back end. The code can get pretty complicated. You can really make this do a whole bunch of things. We actually took it a step further, and then within our app launcher window, you can scroll down, and you'll actually find within our app launcher menu the Worsta project creator, right? So these are just a couple of examples of how you can use AppScript and then really build what feels like a custom app internally. So that's a good example of a web-based app. Oops, sorry, I went a second too far. And JB, I think from the admin side, one of the things that as a workspace administrator, there are a number of functions that you have to complete on a daily or weekly basis. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the solutions you've come up for that?
Sure, and if you want to switch back to the deck.
Yep. There we go.
Yeah, like as Patrick said, the last 2 demos demonstrated automation at the user level. But I think some of the greatest strength of AppScript is to help your workspace administrators perform those daily tasks that they need to do to manage your workspace, right? One of them would be onboarding and offboarding of users, dealing with deprovisioning accounts, data transfer from those accounts, email delegation, things like that. So on the screen, as we're looking kind of at just the basic overall general steps, right? One might take when deprovisioning or terminating a user, right? There would be certain immediate actions that would need to happen, such as resetting the password, signing them out of the web sessions, wiping a mobile device, etc. Then there might be steps that either you're doing immediately or you may want to wait a few days, like giving a manager access to email via delegation, setting up any auto replies for emails or calendar out of offices, transferring calendar events, stuff like that. And then we also have the archival kind of stage where now we're starting to talk about removing licenses or transferring the license from a workspace license to an archive license, or a vault license, something like that. And then finally purging the account. And the nice part with AppScript is that it can tie in all of those, it can tie into all the different services that are needed to perform those functions and kind of do everything in the back end for an administrator. Because we know normally as an administrator, you'd probably have to jump through many different pages of the admin console to wipe the cookies, reset a password, then jump over into GAM to delegate email, and transfer calendars, do a drive transfer through the admin console. Again, jumping around, and that's for every single termination. Well, based on using some sort of trigger, whether it would be maybe a particular OU where you have a deprovisioned OU or an offboarding OU where every time a user is moved into that OU, that triggers this workflow to then have the app script take these steps of resetting the password, delegation, sending an email to the manager, letting them know, hey, you had a terminated employee, you now have access to their inbox, and you will receive their drive files in a transfer if that's your organization is practice, right? So steps like that, they can, again, it could be a move in an organizational unit within the admin console. We can use custom schemas inside of the user profiles. You can build a custom schema for terminations, yet true or false or something like that, or set a date and have it pick up by dates. And with the advances in Google Chat, it's even getting to the point where a chat could be the trigger. You could even have a chat app that for terminations, say process John.Smith, and that would trigger it for you. So there's a lot of opportunity in a lot of different ways that you can work with this to take those mundane daily tasks that are very important, because security is very important, and cleaning house and organization on that.
That's right. Great points. And it can work with upstream systems too. And I think that's, a lot of customers that we work with are using upstream HRIS systems. So Workday, ADP, whatever the thing, Okta, even if you're using a third-party SSO or IDP. Very often those kind of systems can send signals over to Google, right? So I know in one customer we worked with, it was Workday that was that trigger, right? So HR would process somebody in their Workday and HR system that would switch their status to terminated, and that signal right there would trickle its way down to Google Workspace. We extended the schema, as JB mentioned, so that within the user's profile in Google Workspace there was a new attribute called termination status, and if that was true, then a whole bunch of things would happen. So great things to think about. And JB, I'm curious, as there's not really a front end to something like this. This is one of those examples that you mentioned, how it sort of works in the background. As an administrator, can I go back and see how when this was run, right? So what kind of logging, or do you have logging capabilities, I guess, as these things happen?
So there's a few different ways you can look at it. One was through the logging tab that you saw, that you demonstrated in the editor itself.
Right.
But you also set up a Google Sheet to be a sort of log where every time it processes a user, it writes out a new row and treat it as a record, and that would be your database. Another good point is that with AppScript, you can connect to any other open APIs that are out there, whether it would be Asana, Harvest, like Slack. You said, a Salesforce, things like that. With anything with an open API, you can pull in data, but you can also write back out to some things like Cloud SQL, right, in a Google Cloud project. And if you have a lot of data that you need to work with, that maybe Sheets might not be the great backend database to be, it ties into a ton of different SQL databases and such.
That's right. Full support for ODBC. So if you do have an ODBC connection where you want to pull in a large data set, absolutely can be done. Great questions. Great points. Thank you, JB. In the interest of time, wow, we could have gone an hour on this one. We had a lot of good discussion here. But I did want to talk a little bit about how Worcester can help on these services. AppScript is a little bit less low code than it is no code, right? So you do need a little bit more coding experience. So it's a little bit less no code and more low code. So that's on the lower code side of things, right? But we do offer all full development services when in and around Google Apps Script. So if you have any needs, automations, processes that are just taking teams, hours upon hours to complete, let us brainstorm and whiteboard with you. We'll, one of the things I love to do is sort of look for those opportunities to digitize process, so to speak. Outside of AppScript, we talked about AppSheet in our last session. So we did a session in June, I think it was, on AppSheet. AppSheet, if you're unfamiliar, this is an acquisition Google made about 2 years ago. It is a no-code environment. So it's a full WYSIWYG type no-code environment where you can both build full web apps with a UI and mobile apps, things like that. So we do offer services around AppSheet development. The quick implementation, offboarding. So what JB was just talking about there in terms of offboarding, we recognize that this is sort of a need, across many workspace organizations, especially those that are sort of light staffed on the IT side, which is growing more common, I think, these days. But if you are interested in that, if you don't have any offboarding sort of policies or procedures in place today, definitely recommend you evaluating that and what your needs are around offboarding. Tie that in with your legal and HR and compliance teams on what they want from a retention perspective. That may be driven by regulation and government, or it just may be sort of unique to your own organization. But having those retention guidelines will help sort of drive how you can automate offboarding. So we can certainly help around that. And then, of course, outside of this team, specifically JB and I, is our full stack development. We do have a full team of full stack developers if needed. But I definitely want to open it up for any questions. But before we do so, Daphne, if you want to recap us a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to recap what we discussed today, we went over the overall benefits of AppScript, examples of enterprise use cases, the Google integrations, templates, and automation, as well as the different offerings we have here at Worcester.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then before we do get into questions, we would like to share some resources for all of you. If you like the idea of automation, be sure to check out the AppSheet webinar Patrick had mentioned that we hosted back in May. You can find that on our YouTube channel, as well as the resources page on our website. So we'll be adding those links in the chat as well for your reference. And then, as we mentioned earlier, we are here to help you, so we can guide you through using AppScript. Your Worcester rep will be reaching out to schedule a quick call to go over those details and to debrief today's webinar in the coming days. And as always, we would love your feedback, so there will be another link in the chat. You'll also receive a follow-up email with a short survey to tell us what you thought of today's discussion.
Thank you, Daphne.
You're welcome.
And I can't believe that was May already. Time is flying by way too quick.
I know, right?
I do see one question in here from Robert. Question is, seems like Google is constantly making changes to the interfaces. Yes, they definitely are. How often are you finding Google Apps scripts getting broken due to those changes? JB, I'll punt this one over to you. It's not so much interface changes that break things, but API changes definitely have. JB, if you want to elaborate.
And not too often, I think, again, because a lot of the changes that they're making with the interface of Gmail or Hangouts and Chat is a lot of cosmetic. On their end, the APIs that all of AppScript are working off of are the open APIs that anyone else writing in Python or some other programming language are also using. So those don't change as often, and even when they do come out and say that they are gonna decommission something, they give you a good gap of time with that, and sometimes they don't even turn it off. They continue to extend it. I know a good example was the email settings API before they wanted everyone to switch over to the Gmail settings API. Right. And that took at least 2 years from when they notified developers that they were going to be retiring that API and having all the services moved over into what they were calling the Gmail settings API. So not too often, but occasionally you will see some changes that need to be made, especially again when you talk about previous Hangouts to chat, kind of almost two different platforms. So APIs and stuff like that could be a little different.
Great points. And our team did post a couple of links for anybody that's interested in maybe building a hello world type application with AppScript. There's a couple of good links for some developer stuff that Google's put together to help you sort of learn AppScript. We did get another question that came in as well from Mark. Mark asks about macros and VB scripts and how they inherently have a sort of a security risk within Microsoft, and Microsoft provides some control on how those can be used. And does Google offer the same? So yes, it does. In a couple of different ways. One, AppScript as a service can be limited in scope in terms of who you enable it for. So using a Google group or Google security group within your admin console, you can corral your users that you want to give your AppScript service to. Maybe it's a team of developers or your technologists, and then just enable the service for that group. From there, through your API controls under your security section in Google Workspace admin, you have the ability to trust or block any internal apps. So if you wanted to block by default any app that was developed internally, which includes AppScript services, you can block those by default.
And to touch on one more point that we didn't see in any of the demos, since we've already run those demos, the very first time you run any AppScript app, you will see the Google permission screen.
Right.
This app would like to use the following options: read your Gmail, access your Google Drive. So you'll see the permissions there, and it'll give you that compliance screen that you can say no. So as the end user, you can take an advantage of that. And again, and to back up, an end user still just blindly clicking yes to that. With the API controls in your admin console, you can also restrict that. Also, some of the app scripts themselves, when you run them as a web app, there's an option to say only allow it to run internally. So it's almost like you'll end up getting, if someone had the link, they would be prompted with a Google login, and it would only allow them if they logged in with your domain credentials. So there's security around it in that way.
That's right. And Mark, I'll throw you a little bonus bone here as well. There is a Google engineered macro converter. So if you are still dependent on some old legacy Microsoft macros, Google actually does make a macro converter that integrates with Google Sheets. So you can take your Microsoft macros and put it through this engine, and it should spit out something that works in Google Sheets. And in some cases, those macros can't be automatically converted and doesn't require sort of a redev within Google Sheets. If you need any assistance with any of that, I'd be happy to help. You got it, Mark. So that's that. And we have another question from John. I know we're a little bit over, but we'll definitely take this question. John asks a good question. When deploying AppScript, should it be done under a service account in case that person leaves the organization or has a password change? I'll take quick response, and then JB, I'm sure you'll have something to add here. In a standard app like the Gmail app, that app, the Gmail delete spreadsheet thing that I showed, that app can be authorized and run by anybody, right? So if I gave John a copy of that sheet, when he ran it the first time, it's going to say, hey, do you want to run this under your own account, right? Because that script is intended to be run by the person that's configured it. So in that case, no, the person that developed it doesn't necessarily need to have an account long term. There are options when you're creating app scripts to have a script run as the author, right? So have it run as a super admin. In those cases, you may want to have a shared mailbox or some sort of generic account that can host and store those services. The last piece is if you're doing advanced scripting where you're tapping into like the Google Workspace admin API, that's going to require a Google Cloud project that has an OAuth domain-wide delegation service account tied to it. In those cases, you would not need to change anything if somebody left, but you probably want to keep those keys rotated. That is good security practice. JB, any flavor to add to that?
No, I think you hit on all of them. Yeah, a lot of them, especially ones that are made for the user end, you got to think of it as being attached to that Google Sheet. So almost as a template. So like the Gmail label one, it would almost be a template that you would pass around, say, make a copy of this sheet and then run it yourself. So you would have multiple copies of that script out in your organization, right? Because everyone would have their own sheet, everyone has their own labels, and you want the individual to run it so it's processing their mailbox and they're giving authorization for that. So like that. So in that aspect, and you're right. And there are certain, and we didn't touch on that, but as much as we said that Google bakes in the Google APIs into AppScript to make it easier, there are certain APIs that they haven't baked in. So you would need to make that external call. And like Patrick said, that's where running a GCP project with adding the scopes and a service account, would come into play. Some of the more advanced settings or configuration of user accounts when you need to impersonate a user to accomplish something. Be those
I think
scenarios.
that's the key word right there, is if you're looking to do something on behalf of another user, you're likely going to need that GCP advanced connection service, right? You're going to need that OAuth grant, that impersonation right. So yeah. With that said, you got it, John. Hopefully that was helpful. With that said, we're a few minutes over. I want to thank everybody for hanging out with us. There's definitely a lot more we can cover in terms of AppScript. We weren't really sure how deep to dive into here, so maybe we'll do a 201 class in the coming months. But as Daphne mentioned, your account reps, if you're working through Worsta, will reach out. If you have any general questions, info@worsta.com. John or I would be happy to sit down with you and go through any unique needs that you have in your organization. I'll hand it back over to Daphne to sign us off.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that is all the time we have today. I know we went a little bit over, but hopefully it was of value to all of you. So thank you, everyone. And we hope to see you and speak to you soon.